Hi, my name is Marguerite Ward, and I'm a leadership correspondent at Insider. Today, I'm sitting down with Jose Minaya, CEO of Nuveen, the asset manager for financial services giant TIAA. In our equity talk, we'll be marking Hispanic Heritage Month with a conversation on the economy, inequality, and leadership. Jose, thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you for having me.
So, you're a first generation Hispanic American who came from humble beginnings, growing up in the Bronx. English was your second language. Tell me about your childhood and in what ways did it shape your leadership style today?
I think it's really it's where I'm grounded. I'll make one correction. I did grow up in New York City. I grew up in Manhattan, actually, Washington Heights. So thanks to Lin Manuel, I think a few more people know where Washington Heights actually is these days. But look, I coming from that community, it's who I represent myself with as a first generation American. Growing up in a community that was largely a bubble, right? I grew up in a Spanish speaking home. I grew in largely a Spanish speaking community where there was the stores you went to, the youth leagues that I played in. And from that community, I got a really strong sense of family. I got a strong sense of work ethic and pride in the work that people in that community did. My dad worked in kitchens and restaurants. My mother was a housekeeper at a hotel, and they took great pride in what they did. And that always stayed with me. At the same time, being in that community, being in that bubble, I knew very little about going outside, and I aspired to go outside that bubble as a young kid as I was going through school. So I also took away from it being resourceful, right? Being curious. For me, was always trying to figure out the next thing because while I came from a very loving family and community, there wasn't much they can tell me in terms of orientating me, in terms of leaving that community or going to college, going to Wall Street, going to financial services overall. So I had to figure things out along the way. The SATs, I didn't really know what that was until it was introduced. I had to figure out how to. I had one friend who was also thinking about going to college. We split one book, and we would trade off every other day. I would ask people a lot of questions around Wall Street and financial services. So again, to me, it was around community work ethic, but it was also around being resourceful and being curious.
Yeah, you talk about how you didn't have access to many of the opportunities that maybe some others had, some others in your community, people at school, so that it was really self-taught. We'll get more into the discrepancies between Hispanic Americans and white Americans in terms of opportunity in a bit, but you hit the nail on the head. You came from uh, beginnings where your father was a dishwasher and your mother cleaned hotel rooms and you struggled. Now you're the CEO of a leading asset management company overseeing over 1 trillion in assets under management. In many ways, you're the symbol of the American dream. Do you think that that American dream is still possible today, given rising inequality in the US? I mean, just to point out, most Americans can't cover $1,000 in emergency expenses. Do you think your story would be possible today? And what are your thoughts on the American dream?
I really do. I think the American dream is still alive and well. If I think about my parents, and again, my dad being a dishwasher, my mom working in hotels, cleaning rooms, they lived their version of the American dream. I think about myself here and where I'm sitting in this seat and what I do for Nuveen. I'm very well aware I had better odds of winning the lotto than I did rising to where I am today in corporate America. So I realized my American dream. But those inequalities, of course, they absolutely still exist. That when you think about being able to save, having enough to send your kid to college. Well, my parents were in a worse situation then, but they realized, again, their version of the American dream. I think we expect a lot more from us today in society. Those inequalities are there. We've come a long way. We still have a very long way to go, right? And I think especially for demographics, since the last 30, 40 years, it's one of the fastest growing demographics, is the fastest growing demographic in the US. So while I believe absolutely the American dream is still possible today, that does not mean we do not continue to have inequalities and still have a lot of work to do.
Right, and we're here in part because of Hispanic Heritage Month. In addition to the well-documented pay gap between Hispanic Americans and white Americans, Hispanic households face particular challenges. 17% less likely than white households to have access to a retirement plan. 51% of Hispanic millennials don't have a financial role model. How are you working to change this? How are you working at Nuveen to change the face of economic prosperity?
Okay, I think one is kind of understanding this is about being inclusive and inclusivity, right? So thinking about that. The other one is going back to capitalism, that also reminding people this is a massive opportunity, right? So today, if you think about, I said it's Hispanics are the largest minority group in the U.S., the fastest growing. If you think about the buying power of that community, today the GDP that that community generates would make it the seventh largest economy by GDP standards, forecasted to be five. That is an amazing amount of buying power. And then when you think about that demographic and say less than a third of them have access to a retirement product or retirement services or advice. Again, on one end, it is about being more inclusive, right? On our end, it's focusing around being more literate, around whether it's our materials, Spanish-speaking people, and not just people that majored in Spanish in college. It is true kind of understanding that community. I always say when I first, early in my career, I saw materials being generated as people recognize, oh, we have more clients who speak Spanish. When I looked at it, I was like, my mom would actually be kind of insulted by this. It translates dictionary-wise. And I'm like, how could this happen? What happens because there weren't the right people at the table to be able to really understand that community and be able to engage with it and sell to it, right? So to me, that is the focus today, is one around understanding we need to be more inclusive as a society and bringing these different cohorts along. But then also, it's a massive business opportunity. These are all people that can use retirement services. It will better themselves. It will increase their net worth, and it will make them better in society as well.
So you talk about the business case for diversity, that there's a clear case, and in fact, there's well-documented research that I've written about on how employees who feel more included at work are more loyal. They're more likely to stay within a company. And then you're talking about the consumer side, where people want to join companies and spend their money with companies that are inclusive. Nuveen is in an interesting position. It's a global firm with many portfolio companies. How are you making DEI not just something at your own company, but something that's important to your portfolio companies as well?
To me, it's always focusing on the bottom line because, as you mentioned, the research is well documented, right? Diverse firms, diverse boards, they make better decisions, they have better performance, and I think people academically understand that. But there wasn't really a strong, imperative to do that. People say, how come the firm, companies as a whole haven't been held more accountable? They haven't had to. Business has continued. But today, it's what I call more of the perfect storm, right? Where the way we do it in terms of our portfolio companies, first of all, is through engagement, right? As we vote thousands of proxies, and most of them we're very engaged on the diversity side. We have almost 1,000 meetings a year where we're sitting with management companies, the management of all these different companies, engaging on topics, talking to them about how we think they can be a better firm and therefore drive more value for our own investment. And at the end of the day, even if you don't believe that research, it's kind of understanding that whether it's your shareholders that are demanding this, whether it is your clients who are going to be demanding this, or by the way, in the war for talent, your talent pool and being able to attract the best people, it is a perfect storm that in all three of those areas, people care about these issues. So even, I had an advisor one time put this to me very simply. Listen, even if you don't believe in that research, you don't do this well, you just ain't getting the money at the end of the day. So this is why I think there's been so much more aware of this, because it's good old capitalism, understanding the buying power is there. But by the way, when you start losing business to other companies that do get this right, I think, again, people tend to wake up.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned an inclusive capitalism that's fair and that treats people well and brings people from different backgrounds to the table. Can you explain a little bit more of your vision, and if it's possible in today's environment where we have vast disparities in pay between workers and leaders? So we have the inequality side, and then we also have the side where there's this whole anti-woke movement Some people don't believe in ESG and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as you're well aware. How can we push this idea of an inclusive capitalism when we have so much headwind?
Yeah, and again, I think to me, what's really changing the dynamic here is one is social media, and just I think the pandemic accelerated all these trends. Right, the information is able to flow more quickly. Again, I think it's a bottom line issue today. As you know, as we think about inclusive capital, for example, to me, it's very simple. It's like one, okay, we can look at the demographics of this country, the buying power, and we say, okay, this is an attractive investment thesis. By the way, hey, we can look around, hey, portfolio theory 101. The more options I have, the more access I have to different, investment opportunities, the better I'm going to do. Right? We've started our own program of investing in minority-owned firms and minority-owned private equity sponsors as well. And again, to me, it's a very simple equation. It's one of, hey, there's a good story here in terms of the underlying fundamentals of what's going on with, again, this growing demographic. Hey, we are now seeing more transactions than maybe we weren't seeing before for whatever reason. They may not have the same network of people. It takes working harder on our side to discover these opportunities, but it's always driven with that ability around diversifying our portfolio, getting access to these unique investment theses. And I do think what's going on in this country and these growing demographics, it is a unique investment opportunity. You mentioned the headwinds out there. By the way, I think it's a positive thing. ESG for too long was, the acronyms, there's so many, responsible investing, ESG. Ultimately, though, today, there is a lot more scrutiny behind this because it's becoming more real, right? It was this narrative of do the right thing. I don't want to invest in sin stocks. To you look out your window, well, there's natural disasters happening. There's floods. There's fires. There's real issue going on in the labor force, right? We saw that in COVID with frontline workers. These things impact companies financially in a big way. So understanding that we have to look at these from a risk factor lens is a reality today in ESG. Yet, because the demand is there, as I said, right, whether you like this or not, your clients are going to be demanding this. Everyone quickly will want to label something ESG, but now the scrutiny is coming in. So that what may feel like headwinds, I think it's actually progress. I think it's becoming a more professional type of environment around this. It's becoming more institutionalized. You're going to see regulators getting more involved. It may seem like headwinds, but it's really what provides the right kind of metrics in place to allow the capital markets to really expand in this particular area. So yes, it's become more political. Yes, there's more headwinds. I think it's been a long time coming. It's here, and I think it's really what propels us to the next phase.
I love your framing that, the critique and the pushing against ESG actually means that people are taking it seriously, that they want standardization, that they want to have this movement have some teeth. And also just in your framing of DEI, yes, we're in a highly politicized environment, but you always return to the bottom line, how it impacts your firm, how it impacts the people that you serve. So that's really enlightening. Going back to this idea of the perfect storm, the COVID-19 pandemic, resulting economic downturn, had a particularly difficult and hard impact on the Hispanic community in terms of higher unemployment and financial setbacks. How does society begin to build back or build from this? Is a recovery possible? What do you think as a leader in the financial world?
I think it is, and by the way, for hundreds of years, we've gone through multiple different cycles. And I first kind of pause and think about, COVID. COVID didn't really change any trend. All it did was it accelerated things. If there was inequalities, they became more visible to us during COVID. Even something as simple as we sent everybody to work from home, but then at moments we needed people to work the mailroom to be here. There were other folks that needed to be in locations. That didn't feel very equitable, right? I got to go home. I live in a suburb. I could spread out of my house. Meanwhile, we were making someone else potentially come in on the subway in New York to come in during the height of the pandemic. That did not feel good. And it's things that we addressed right away. But it brought it more to light. And I think the other thing that it did it's what makes me the most optimistic that we do continue to get better from here. It raised awareness and it empowered people. it actually led to conversations of kind of and being unaware. I myself might have been unaware of what it means coming back to the office for a single mom, for someone who was caring for their elderly parents. There's a lot of things that did not come out in the normal vernacular. They came to light. It's the same thing with the Hispanic community. The trends didn't change. It's just this became more apparent, right? When you're in a more dire situation, if you were hurting, you're going to hurt even more. And it becomes very apparent just when you walk the streets, when you're interacting with people. But again, to me, the point that there's real conversations happening today, that there's more awareness. Again, in a digital age, social media, information is flowing. I'm extremely optimistic about our future.
How do you make sure, as a CEO, that the conversations that were started in 2020 don't die down? So, for example, we're seeing a wave of unionization among workers, which of course is a hot topic for any CEO. But what I'm trying to get at is that many workers feel that they were promised better wages, better benefits, fairer treatment in 2020, and those promises haven't come to fruition. Using that as an example, how do you feel that we can make the pandemic and the racial conversation it started not just a moment, but really coming through on promises that were promised back then?
Sure. And look, first it starts from the top, right? I mean, I think it's kind of leadership kind of ensuring that, hey, this is not something that is just kind of a passing trend, or hey, now everyone's back in the office, things kind of go back to normal. Number two, it's culture, right? So to me, if you build the right culture in your firm, you hold each other accountable. Certain things are not acceptable in terms of how we behave and how we think. But again, the most important piece goes back to the bottom line. Because like I said, today, our employees, I think employees across the globe, have not just more awareness, they're more empowered. I will tell you today, I will get an email from any part of the organization at any level challenging me on some of our decisions, pushing and saying, why are we not doing this or that? So today, the reason I know from here this becomes more of a standard is if I'm in a people business, if I want to attract the right talent and I completely disregard this, the best talent is not going to come to our firm. And again, that wokeness, I would say more the awakening of our employees and more largely our workforce. They're more empowered to unite, to tell you what they're not okay with. And I think that is tremendous progress.
Yeah, yeah. When you look back over the years of being an executive, of being a CEO, of being in this industry for years, what are you most excited about that has changed when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? How has the conversation changed? And what is it like to be a CEO right now?
So I think, like, I think it's an interesting question. But one, I'm kind of very excited about. The other one is the reality of challenges for leaders today. The one I'm excited about is, at our firm, we decided to lead what we called courageous conversations, and it was simply just bringing people in the room to talk about their own experiences and their own stories. And it was so powerful, right? I take myself as an example. I understood, I thought I could relate with a broader minority community, growing up as a person of color, Hispanic American in a community like Washington Heights. Yet when I would sit with my colleagues, I understood, well, the Black journey was different from mine and maybe different from the Asian American one. And just hearing their stories and from people that, you would have been surprised to hear these things. That was very, very empowering. And I think that is good. That is the awareness. That is the whether it's social media, other methods of communication. These things are coming out. Now, I will tell you what is extremely challenging today. There is no playbook for this in corporate America. When the murder of George Floyd first happened, different situations on the social side of things. We were all trained as leaders. It's like we stay away from politics. We stay away from some of these social issues. And then quickly realizing, oh, we can't here because our people demand it. Our clients are demanding to know what we do. It is a very uncomfortable place for senior management, right? And leaders and CEOs, I think, across corporate America. You've seen some follies out there and things that are said or not said. But again, that is tremendous progress. I think the fact that it's uncomfortable is a good thing because it's leading us to get more engaged, talk about these issues. You mentioned this earlier in one of your comments where our clients and our people, they're expecting to partner and buy from institutions that share their values. So now they want to understand, well, what are your values on this? And again, that first impact, I think, for most corporate leaders earlier on was one of, we don't touch these subjects. Well, now, whether it's an election, whether it's a policy change, whether it's a Supreme Court decision, corporate American leaders are now really, it's their constituents are demanding to know, well, where does your company stand on these things? Very challenging, very uncomfortable, but I view it as progress.
What are you most excited about for the future in terms of both core business and DEI? Because from our conversation, you really view them as one and the same. So, looking ahead, what are you most focused on? It could be a program you have going at Nuveen, a new type of investment strategy at Nuveen. What are you most excited about that will advance both your business and diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Again, I think it's this kind of broader focus around that as we grow larger as an organization, the ability to kind of drive higher returns and look for opportunities, the bigger pool you have, the better opportunity you have as well. I think what we have today is a culture and better awareness that there's a broader sense of places to go for both talent and to go for investment ideas, right? Whether, again, I think about the demographics I mentioned within the Hispanic community. That awareness and people getting educated with those numbers, if you're a good investment professional, the light goes off and says, well, hey, how do I get me some of that? It's high growth. It's a big population. What are the companies that are focusing on this? It's also kind of understanding, where do I go and get better talent? I don't have to fish in the same 5 ponds or the same 20 schools. I can go broader. And what we're seeing today as it comes in, people see the results, right? So this is more around in a world that gets much more difficult to drive alpha or excess returns. Knowing that there's a broader pool out there that you can go get this talent. To me, it's capitalism and the bottom line that really drive this. When you have that in place, and it's not just about academic research, it's not just about let's do the right thing. It is about, hey, you're going to make money doing this. You're gonna further the value that you're providing to your stakeholders. That is what gets me excited, because that to me is what quickly is becoming the dialogue and the discussion. It is the opportunity.
Absolutely. And speaking of opportunity, my last question for you is, how are you paving the way for other people who might say, oh, I want to be Jose, I want to be the CEO of Nuveen? Especially when you look back at how far you've come from your parents' American dream to your American dream. How are you paving the way so that you're not one of only a handful of Hispanic top CEOs? How are you thinking about your legacy?
Well, first and foremost, it's showing up. Right. And I will tell you, earlier in my career, I think for first generation Americans, definitely someone coming out of the Hispanic community, it's a very lonely place because you're initially leaving that community. You're going into a different environment. You don't have a lot in common with the people now you're working with, and you're in that same professional environment. Yet you've left your old community. Yes, you can go back, but they don't really understand what you're doing now in your current job. They don't understand why you've moved and you're living somewhere else and these things. For me, early on in that part of my career, I was really focused on how do I acclimate. And sometimes that did not mean I was being my true self. I'd work every day. I was trying to fit in. And two powerful things that I've kind of realized. One, when I first started going out there many years ago and just engaging with Hispanic groups, whether it was at a university or elsewhere, it hit me the massive impact that these individuals or these students would have just by seeing, oh, there's someone that looks like me in my background that is doing what I'm doing. That stuck with me. So I always say, hey, a big part of this is it is just showing up, right? The other part is reminding my fellow Hispanics and other folks in minority groups, don't be afraid to be your true self in the office, because I know how lonely it can be. I know about imposter syndrome when you're in the room. And trust me, bringing your true self, that is the diversity we want, the thought. And you're going to have an impulse to say, how do I fit in quickly? And of course, that's always out there. Inequalities exist, as I mentioned. But you're really going to be your best when you bring your true self to the workplace.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank my guest again, Jose Minaya, CEO of Nuveen, for his time and your insight. Today, we learned a lot about diversity and inclusion, Nuveen's mission, Jose's story and his legacy, and talking about how we can advance equity, especially for Hispanic Americans. Thanks to everyone watching. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month, and thank you again, Jose.
Gracias, Marguerite.